Thank you so much. Nice. So here to have me.
Ben, why don't you start off with a quick introduction about yourself and about the organization that you're with, just so that our viewers are aware of it.
My name is Ben Kickler, and I have been in the charging market sector for 8 years, about different roles. Started in the center of the object in Europe, quite a relevant player in the market. Then from there, went on to different stations, but most notably probably consulting with Cosmic Cat Group, and also Switch backend for the EV infrastructure, really. So both an operating system, but embedded software. And also a bit of telematics. So I know a fair bit about the entire system. Now I'm with Rivety, which is a financial solution provider, which basically means we help the markets to make cash and make sure that it works, that they have an overview about the money that is left in their accounts, how much they actually can spend, hopefully, so that they can optimize their investments, and also that their whole payment solutions or everything that's around payment is basically taken care of. If they want to, of course, they can handle it by themselves, but that's what we've been doing for 25 years. So we kind of learned a thing or two. And usually it's just, it makes much sense to outfarm these kind of niche, let's say, elements, because it's not essential to your value chain. So it's probably cheaper to give it to somebody that's doing nothing else than you doing it in-house. And that's what we do with Rivety. And we're now starting to look at the EV charging market. We haven't done before, and hence I'm here.
Amazing. Very rich background. And so you know pretty much everything about this industry. So first question, which is the elephant in the room, then, is the slowdown. You know, we saw in multiple presentations today that everybody talked about this, different perspectives. How do you see this? What has happened so far in 2024? And what should we expect in the coming years?
Yeah. It's kind of a favorite topic of many people. I have a slightly different opinion. I don't think it has anything to do with EV charging, really. I think it's an economical situation that we're in. We have a recession in Germany, which is the largest economy in Europe. We have the American elections coming up. And my understanding is that all the big companies, and that's also outside of EV charging, other industries, basically hoard their cash. They basically try to, or they do prepare for the recession that might never come. And so investments are low. And that's particularly the case for economies and large-scale businesses. And that, of course, then triples down into the economy. That's one element to keep in mind, because that is something that's mostly driven by politics and the latest election that will come. And once that is sorted, everybody will basically have a runway to plan their agenda against. That's one thing that's to be kept in mind. The other thing is regarding the slowdown of EV sales, which is what's most of the time referred to.
No.
Yes, it's true that has slightly declined or slowed down in Germany, not in all over Europe, only Germany, that is. And that is mostly the case because of subsidies by the government that were taken off. So, of course, if you reduce the governmental support in terms of money, then the buyers are not as eager to buy, which is most logic. And that's basically what this is. And besides that, we are in the early infancies of this market. So it's not that we have a slowdown. If you look at the transactions we have for one of our customers, that's actually a network, high power corridor network, so lots of holiday, long distance travel. It's a steep curve. It's a 16x growth in the last 3 years. And that's not a flat line. So I don't see that narrative to be true. I think it's more, there's politics behind it and lobbyism and all that kind of thing. There's different interests in the market, but I don't see it. I see that there is a waiting moment at the moment, given to the reasons I just mentioned, but I don't see a flat line, and I expect it to picking up again next year.
Amazing. So that's one of the key trends. Are there other trends that we should be, expected to see in the coming years? What do you think really will shape this industry? You to name a couple from your side.
I mean, one thing that's happening for sure is there is a consolidation in the market. There's many businesses, unfortunately, just now, one big business filed bankruptcy, EVA Global. Another one last week was EVBox, and there's others. So there is that's happening, which basically means consolidation, which means not so many different participants, but more smaller, larger companies that are basically then sharing the market amongst each other. That's one thing that's happening. It's a big trend, consolidation. The other one, so the opposite of fragmentation, which was happening before the last 10 years. Along with that comes a move towards a specialization, of course, again. So if you have big players, they cannot do everything by themselves. Doesn't make sense. So they will need special support from individual companies that focus on very sharp value propositions. That's also something that will keep increasing, but it will increase particularly in the areas of value creation, which is, for example, payment. But also other things that you can see that are actually growing at the moment is everything regarding dynamic electricity prices. The dynamic pricing market is growing. The companies involved in it are also actually having definitely an increase in business. And that's something that will keep going on. So that's another thing that will happen. Basically, the liberalization, the integration of the energy market into this EV charging sector. And with that will come bidirectional charging. And that's something that's probably very essential also for efficiency. So that would be the main things that we're going to find out. Yeah.
With bidirectional charging, I have a follow-up question, Ben. We have heard a lot about V2G, how this can be a big support for the grid, and everyone, it's a win-win for everyone. But it has stayed in this, stage of testing, prototyping for a long time. What are the key barriers you think which are there, and how can you move it fast? Because everyone, I think, agrees that it's a great solution. It's a win for everyone. But then again, there's not a lot happening when it comes to V2G supported charging infrastructure, V2G supported, even from the automotive side. So there's not that pace that everyone expected. So
Yeah.
how do you see this? Are there any roadblocks that can be removed in this regard?
Yeah, there certainly are roadblocks, particularly two. One's easier to remove than the other. One main roadblock is, of course, let's say, federalistic structure of particularly Germany, but also other countries where the electricity grid is built of 100 subgrids that are independent. And so unifying all of that on a countrywide level, transregional level, is not going to happen fast because the energy companies, local providers particularly, are not necessarily the fast-moving companies. And that's the difference per region. So that's one element to keep in mind. So there's other regions such as Netherlands, such as Denmark, such as also France, and sometimes also Spain, where that is actually already happening. Also in the US, that might be actually happening quicker. UK, it's also happening. So that barrier is already being removed in these markets. It might take longer in markets such as Germany. The other thing that is to be removed or that could be resolved is actually the question of the ownership of the battery. And that's a big one because that's undefined and undiscussed. As I see it, it's kind of really an elephant in the room because the car manufacturer, of course, the battery is the most expensive part. So, and it's also something that's crucial to performance and to longevity of the car. And currently that is owned by the owner. So the OEM is most of the time selling it with the car. So it belongs to the person that owns the car. And now there's a big fear of battery degradation with bidirectional charging. That is not really right, because if you do it right, and you do it right because it has to be done by the smart algorithm and things, so it needs to be smart, then the degradation is proven to be only minimal. Nevertheless, there's a big fear. And that fear can be resolved by resolving the question of ownership of the battery. So if there would be dedicated companies, for example, that would own that battery, that you as an owner could sell to or lease it to, or if that would be already involved in the buying process of the car, then there would be no longer the question of who actually is in charge, because the OEMs don't want to touch it because they don't want to be responsible for the battery to break an essential part of their car. That's their nightmare. So they don't have any reason to do that unless they own it. And currently they're busy with other things. They need to get their production lines straight. They need to get their sales ramped up, and they're not going to start a new war about technology that is really complex in the rollout. That's something that's also to be kept in mind. But that is the two areas I would see that could be removed. Yeah.
And with regards to V2G, there is always discussion of the power grid because, that's the whole paradigm that, hey, your EVs are not a burden, but, can act as a resource for the power grid. How do you see this, the whole situation of power grid potentially becoming a bottleneck in this? We already see some pockets where it is becoming a problem, in the Netherlands and Germany as well. So how do you see this? Whose responsibility is it? Because, there's a lot of stakeholders when it comes to connection with the DSO or connection with the grid. I spoke with someone, a CPO in Germany, saying that, hey, 800 plus DSOs, it's a nightmare. So cope up with all the requirements, So who does need to play their role better for Power Grid, for not let Power Grid to become a roadblock anymore?
Yeah, I think it needs to be regulative. So the state, essentially the governments who are in effect controlling the TSO, and as such, then what's happening is on the DSO level. And so it needs to be, top down, I think, in that case, given that it's an essential element of state security and you cannot work around that. But that is a little bit usually slow. Politics are not necessarily moving fast, but that is, I think, who would be in charge. And that goes with the whole topic of the energy transition and basically making it possible, which is important because we have enough energy. It's just we don't use it at the right time. So it's not necessarily that we need more energy. Of course, looking ahead, when we will have trillions of cars, electric, of course, they might need additional energy. But if we learn to use the energy more efficient, then that's how we can cope with that. That plus decentralized energy sources is actually the key. And to achieve that, you have to work on a TSO, DSO level to first get the energy across the country, to store it when it's available, to then actually sell it again or give it back into the grid or use it as a buffer to balance the grid in times of need. And also actually support decentralization of energy sources and creation, as well as allowing that cars and also heavy duty fleets and logistic companies with bigger battery packs are actually used for decentralized energy sourcing, so that you actually spread the energy better. Right. And then you can use it more according to times of need without having to create it from scratch.
Uh-huh. We talked about some of the problems, potential issues, and role of different stakeholders, CPOs, MSPs, DSOs. Where does Riverty come in this entire equation? Maybe give us some case studies as to, how different issues were solved by yourself. Maybe a few case studies you could please discuss them.
Yeah. Well, Riverty basically solves the whole equation of how much cash do you have available on your accounts. So accounts receivable is kind of the focus, that what you can afford as a company to do, and that you also actually have the security if you want that the outgoing invoices are actually settled, so that you will get that money in, and by when you will get it in. So we're basically supporting with taking that away from whoever needs to have their bills created and settled and booked. And that means there's different case studies that can come up. Of course, the most prominent one is like the charging network that has high outstanding bills from the E&P side, the e-mobility service providers, who are in the benefit of having asset-light business, but then owe like hundreds of thousands of euros each month to the CPOs who already have a very asset-heavy business. So that's something where we can help by basically factoring this and making sure that the CPO get the money in their account when they expect it to be in the account, so that they again can then settle their bills with the energy provider. So that's one thing. Then the other thing that we do is also we do subscription management and loyalty, which is something that comes more into play, of course, with end consumers. So that can be both on the car owner fleet side, but also on the energy producer side. So, and that's again where we can talk about dynamic energy and dynamic energy prices and all that comes with that later might even be whatever buffer energy for grid stability or even bidirectional. But starting with dynamic energy prices, this is also where we can support complex tariff models, because this is what we've been doing for 20 years. So everywhere where tax legislation, tax situation across countries with complex tariffs comes in, it's the nightmare of anyone that wants to create a business that actually has a core value proposition that they need to work against. And that's not bookkeeping. And that's not making sure that the files are in order and that you have the cash in the account. And this is where Riverty comes in. And Riverty can take this away from you and basically give you a full hands-off solution.
Turnkey solution.
Yeah, a turnkey solution that is then capable of supporting any kind of tariff and cash flow direction you might envision. Third use case could be, for example, something very basic, such as employee reimbursement. So you as a company has employees that have an electric car, they charge it home, And you now want that to be a smooth process so that each month they get a credit note and they just get it transferred wired to their account. And it's everything in your brand and nobody sees that Verity is in that. So we have a complete invisible solution. It's white label, so you can completely brand it. And you as a company can then easily also do specific solutions like that. So that's 3 examples of how we can support.
Maybe one follow-up question before we wrap this discussion up. And with all this information flow, is that a challenge, that you find yourself facing? Because, when it comes to data, there's a lot of discussion of, data privacy, for example. Where do you see yourself in this entire ecosystem? And do you see that this is a challenge? Or do you think that currently what the regulations are, it's good enough and we just have to comply with what is already in place?
Yeah, that comes depending on the market. In general, I'm a big fan of privacy and data privacy, particularly about personal data. I don't think there is personal data that is in particularly anything that belongs to you as a person, your face, your name, where you live, your age, and all of these kind of things. Also, if you want, so your bank accounts, anything can be tracked down back to you as a person. And this is where we should be definitely be true to our heritage of Europe, where this has always been like a cornerstone of our way of looking at it. And I think that's something that can set us apart from the rest of the world, which we are competing against. Therefore, it is important. Then again, if you look at businesses and how to handle data, of course, it's of utmost important that your customers can trust and rely on you. And particularly with us, of course, in finance, it's obvious. Nobody wants their personal information about how their money or bank situation is populated in the wild. Therefore, this is, of course, important. And in the EV charging and the general energy transition market, it's depending on the role. I think there is a lot of data that can be actually used. And in general, data means actually nothing. It's just noise. But then once you structure it and you have enough of it, you can, of course, train, you can do analysis, you can have insights, you can do big data and all the AI and all the stuff that comes with it. But you need a lot of data in order for that to even work. And that, I think, is a lot of buzz at the moment. There's lots of companies talking about it and everybody's like trying to sell it. But the data is not there yet. We're just starting. Because I think we need to have a real market uptake for having enough data that actually AI and prediction, all of the nuance can really be rendering results that are more than a guess. So yes, in the future it will be important, and yes, setting it up for it is also important, but I don't think that there's a real value in it right now, unless you focus on things like location finding for the setup of charging, for example, prediction of the usability or the retention of different charge points, will they be taken, yes or no, things like that is where it's already used and put to play, and it's being used successfully. So there is a value of it, but if you talk real big data in terms of like the entire ecosystem, I think it's complex and it's still changing a lot. So the question is always, what do you want to get out of it? And that needs to be crystal clear with data. Other than that, you are just looking for something in a big mess. So yeah, there's potential, but you need to know what you're looking for.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bren. It was a pleasure. And I'll catch you in the next discussion in some time from now. Thank you.